Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Jason Davis here with you. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Bookmark it, learn it, live it, love it. All of those good things. Happy Tuesday, as I've already said. I'm repeating myself 1 minute into the show. Probably not a good sign. But this is a very, very good show that we've got lined up for you today. Our friend Taylor Twellman, former MLS great and current ESPN analyst, will join us. We're going to ask Taylor specifically about the comments from Jurgen Klinsmann that American players lack the belief to be among the best in the world. This is a guy who spent some time in Europe, came back, made his name in MLS, had the opportunity to go back to Europe and was denied that chance. I'm going to ask Taylor specifically about his mindset as a former player and what he thinks of this generation of players and whether or not they have what it takes to be among the world's best, and if it's just a matter of belief, as Jurgen Klinsmann seems to think. We're going to talk to our friend Graham Ruthven. If I'm getting his name right, I don't know. It looks like Ruthven. I looked it up today. It says Ruthven. From Scotland. He's got an interesting piece on Sports on Earth about doping in soccer. This is a subject we have broached a little bit on this show over the past year or so. Doping in soccer, how pervasive is it? How much of an issue is it? Are any steps being taken to minimize the effect of doping in soccer? His story specifically mentions some interesting and perhaps dirty things happening in Spain, or did happen in Spain. People who have been connected to the cycling scandals when it came to doping are also indirectly, and sometimes directly connected to soccer teams, which is an interesting discussion. This is one of those things, one of the themes of this show, when we talk about these bad things happening in soccer, whether it's match fixing, whether it's rampant corruption through FIFA or any other football governing body, and certainly doping falls under this heading, we have to suspend our skepticism. We have to suspend our disgust a little bit in order to just be fans of this game. That's part of the deal now. Now, we would love to be able to eradicate match fixing. We'd love to be able to eradicate doping. We'd love to be able to eradicate the corruption and all of these problems that exist in the world's game. But for the time being, if you're going to watch soccer each and every weekend, if you're going to partake of international soccer, even in lower leagues, and sometimes that's actually a reason. There's a reason that match fixers go after lower leagues. But if you're going to partake in this game, you gotta separate these two things. We can deal with them, we can address them, but when you turn your television on or you head out to the stadium on a Saturday afternoon, you're not thinking about those things. You push them aside. Doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about them, as I said. And our friend David Cartlidge will join us to talk Spain and Spanish soccer at 11 o'clock. Copa del Rey today. Atleti in hosting Real Madrid, second leg of their Copa del Rey semifinal. Does not look good for Atleti. And they lost on the weekend to Almeria as well. So now it's a three-way tie at the top of La Liga. It just keeps getting funner in Spain. It just keeps getting more interesting. Obviously had Lionel Messi scoring a brace and Barcelona's comprehensive victory on the weekend as well against Sevilla. So we'll talk to David about what's happening in Spain. I also saw something, I'm not sure we'll get deep into this with David, but I also saw something briefly this morning while scanning the news. Something about a law limiting the amount of television revenue available to Barcelona and Real Madrid. I'm going to check up on that. I know that's a thing out there. I don't have any details at the moment, but I'm going to check up on that because we've talked about this. Part of the problem in Spain is the disparity in revenue that's basically a function of how big Barcelona and Real Madrid are to the detriment of everybody else. And when we talk about one of the strongest leagues in the world, if you believe in IFHHS? Or IFF, I don't remember because I don't care. Well, what's the name of that organization? The one that everybody references when it says that MLS is the 79th best league in the world. Even if MLS is the 79th best league in the world, stop referencing that organization, okay? Thank you. Let's just stop validating them. When it comes to Spain, you have an amazing amount of talent in Spanish soccer. Now, you could argue some of that is a function of, certainly they have the talent to go and win continental titles and World Cups as a national team. They have the ability to put together a team like Barcelona, which has so many Spanish internationals in it. And that kind of it builds upon itself. And then you end up with players who are going abroad and making their name. And it seems that there's this massive explosion of talent in Spanish soccer. There is. I'm just saying that in a lot of ways, it becomes a fetish to get a Spanish player. But it is obviously a problem in Spain right now that Barcelona and Real Madrid dominate everything. And it's very difficult for teams lower down the revenue scale to compete with them and end up having to sell players on. And those players have to go outside of Spain or end up at Barcelona or Real Madrid. It becomes a talent drain. So we'll talk to David about not just league happenings and Copa del Rey happenings, but perhaps that as well at the bottom of the hour, 11 o'clock. All right. First thing I want to do here, just to have a little fun with this. I mentioned this yesterday. We got Taylor Twellman in like 3 minutes. I mentioned this yesterday. Shia LaBeouf channeling Eric Cantona at some press conference in Berlin for some movie he made. I actually have the audio, and I want to do a little compare and contrast before we get to Taylor here in a minute and take things to a serious place. First, here's Eric Cantona.
When the seagulls follow the trawler, it's because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea. Thank you.
All right, now that's the standard that we're going to be judging Shia LaBeouf by. And I don't know if he directly lifted this from Cantona. He had to. I mean, come on. Everybody knows Cantona did this. And just because Shia LaBeouf is American doesn't mean we should assume he doesn't know it. I mean, we all know it. We're Americans. Here's Shia LaBeouf.
When the seagulls follow the trawler, it is because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea. Thank you very much.
And then he stormed out. Man, the guy is absolutely, he's nuts right now. He's nuts, that guy. But I actually think he delivered it with as much Cantona as you can muster when you're not Cantona. He was wearing this like grungy hat and he looked terrible. And he definitely doesn't have the bearing of Eric Cantona. He's this little twerpy guy, Shia LaBeouf. And he can't ever approximate Eric Cantona. And I would never try. I mean, do we give him credit for trying? Or do we say you shouldn't have even bothered? It's a pale imitation. It's like when anybody says never sing a Whitney Houston song because you're never going to do it. I'm not a singer, but they tell people like on American Idol, don't sing a Whitney Houston song because you'll never get close to what it actually is. And you'll sound bad by comparison. Thumbs up or thumbs down, Shia LaBeouf. Seagulls and trawlers. Why seagulls? Why not seagulls? I don't know. All right, let's get into this. Taylor Twellman, ESPN. He'll join us in just a minute. We'll talk about American belief. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. right, good idea. Look, you're a pro. All right, we're coming back. 10 seconds.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning, joined now via telephone by our friend Taylor Twellman, currently of ESPN, formerly of the New England Revolution, and other places as well. And that's part of the reason we've got him. Taylor, how are you, buddy?
Good. What's going on, dude? We're not friends, by the way. We're acquaintances. Remember that.
Okay. I apologize. Wow. We've gotten off to a rocky start. I'm going to pull this back around. This is what we do here. Taylor, all right. We are in fact acquaintances. When I say friend of the show, I mean you're going to come on and you're going to tell our listeners your perspective on this. The reason we asked you here is Jurgen Klinsmann he likes to talk. He likes to say stuff like this. And the most recent round of volley of speaking from Jurgen Klinsmann involves whether or not American players have the belief to be among the best in the world. I kind of take this as both Klinsmann prodding American players and maybe making a general statement about the world, the Americans' place in the world. What did you make of these comments?
Well, let's be honest. This is an ongoing discussion that we've talked about in the American game since the start of MLS and even before MLS of why American players aren't playing at the highest level in Europe. And we can all have our own opinions of, the MLS isn't good enough, or the league's not good enough, or going to college is bad, or development's crap, all that stuff. But Jurgen has to talk about this now because arguably his three most important players are playing in MLS,
right,
and come back to MLS. And you're talking about the Clint Dempsey and Michael Bradley coming back to MLS where they were arguably at the pinnacle of their career when you talk about Michael Bradley being in Serie A at Roma and Clint Dempsey being at Tottenham. I took it differently on his quote because what I saw in that quote was they have the qualities to be at the top clubs of the world.
Right.
Now, when Jurgen Klinsmann says that, and obviously, guys, Jason, we have to have it tongue-in-cheek a little bit because he's saying that to promote his national team and his players.
Okay.
But when Jurgen Klinsmann says that, I can guarantee you when the quote is read around the world, people read it twice or three times. Now, the belief, I don't know. I know the Clint Dempsey and the Michael Bradley. They believe they're the best players in the world. If you ask Michael Bradley right now, could he play for Real Madrid, he'd say yes.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's necessarily the case for every player, but I think in certain cases, I don't know. Ask Josie Altidore right now if he really believes he can do it there. He's going through a little bit of a rough patch. Mm-hmm. I think deep down he believes he can, but I think some of his players are. I don't know if I agree with they don't believe it. Mm-hmm. But, Jason, in fairness to the American player, if you're always playing at that mid to bottom table clubs in England, Germany, and for that, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to have a belief that you can play at the high clubs when every single one of your teammates is playing at that mid-table club.
Well, let me ask you about your experience because after college you went to Germany, you went to 1860, and you tried to do it there. When you were there, did you have any sense? I mean, did you feel like I'm American? I've got to try harder. Did you feel like you weren't good enough? Did any of that stuff pass through your mind?
No. And I'll tell you what, it's apples to oranges, and here's why. If you also look at what Jurgen Klinsmann said is we need a quarterfinal, even a semifinal appearance by the United States.
Right.
I went to Germany after arguably the worst World Cup experience for the United States, 98.
That's true.
And I say that and we laugh and I remind Alexi Wallace all the time that he was part of that, all that. But the reality is I went there. So the only player to come out of that World Cup with any kind of credibility was Frankie Haydick, and he was playing in the fourth division for Bayer Leverkusen. So I went over there, Jason, and I led the reserve team in goals. It didn't matter if I scored 100 goals or 5 goals. That coach flat out told me 6 months into my contract, until you are 24 years old, you learn the German language and your experience, you're making the first team. I ended up with 25, 26 goals with the reserve team. Next year came in, still stuck with the reserves. So it didn't matter at that point. Now, after the 2002 World Cup, I think times have changed a little bit. I don't think the viewpoint is the same. And so that's why I say it's apples to oranges. And you look at what Jurgen said, we need a quarterfinal, even a semifinal appearance. I think the credibility of the American player after the 2002 World Cup went up a little bit. And then you saw the players go over. Now, obviously, 2006 didn't help. But I think right now, that American player is looked at as a Stoke City type player, which isn't a bad thing. But to Jurgen's point, if you're an American player, my question is, how can you say to the American players they don't have a belief if they're never given the opportunity?
Right. I mean, that's obviously the other side of this coin. And listening to him talk, he sort of kind of came at that from like a side angle and sort of, because like you said, he mentioned that the United States has to go and do it on the world stage in the World Cup in order for people to take American players seriously. So it's 6 in one, half dozen in the other. I mean, it's kind of as you said, how can American players really feel like they can do it at the top level if they're not given the chance at the top level? Is it just a matter of that World Cup success? Or because you would think that if Clint Dempsey can go and be, third in the Premier League in goals in a season, that might help as well.
Yeah, I still think anyone that wants to convince me there's not a stigma to the American player, I think they're living under a rock. Because if Clint Dempsey was an Eastern European player when he was third in the Premier League in goals, he would have been at Arsenal. I don't care what anyone says. There still is that stigma of the American player can't do it on the offensive side of things. Now, is some of that true? Yeah, fair enough. But now we're starting to get players to get in there. But whether it's a Jeff Cameron or a Tim Howard or Brad Guzan, there's no. Oh yeah, it's simple. Good goalkeeper, great goalkeeper, fine. A simple right back that can get up and down, work hard. Yeah, we have that. But Clint Dempsey, third in the Premier League. I don't know. And Alexi and I would talk about this all the time. Imagine if Clint Dempsey was not Clint Dempsey from Nacogdoches, Texas, but it was Clint Dempsey from Ukraine, Clint Dempsey from Eastern Europe. Imagine that.
Yeah.
No questions about it.
How much of Clint obviously has a great story, and I think it's a credit to American soccer, his story, and credit to his parents and his family and the commitment and all of those things, and college soccer, what happened with him going from Furman to the Revs. But at the same time, do you think that is maybe a strike against him in Europe? It's not Clint Dempsey was 15 and joined a professional academy. He had to go through this weird route that they just don't understand.
Yeah, I think part of it is them not understanding. I don't think they really care, to be quite honest. If you're good enough, you're good enough. If you went to Furman University, fine. If you went through the New England Revolution Academy, fine. I don't think they truly understand it, but I don't think it matters. I really believe over there, if you're good enough, you're good enough. But Clint Dempsey was good enough. He's third in the Premier League in goals, and yet the most he could get was coming off the bench for Tottenham. You follow where I'm going here? I mean, that it's hard to argue that Clint, there was interest from Arsenal, but if that's not Clint Dempsey from Nacogdoches, Texas, I don't know. I think it's a different story.
It's interesting, and every time I hear Klinsmann talk about this kind of stuff, Taylor, I get the distinct feeling he's not just talking about now. He's not just talking about Clint Dempsey and Michael Bradley, although those are the obvious examples, and he did reference.
No, of course not. He's
talking about long. He's got this big, gigantic, long-term vision, which is part of what he's getting paid for. And I think all of this is these little. I don't know how calculated he is, but I definitely think he's trying to push the narrative, not just here, but everywhere else, for American soccer forward with an eye towards, the next generation of players having the belief.
Yeah, Jason, I think there's no denying it. I will tell you this. I think if you sat Jurgen down, this is what I believe he would say, but this is my viewpoint as well. Our biggest problem right now in American soccer, and everyone needs to realize this, it's not the belief of the national team players. What happens to the development of players after age 17? And there is a huge, huge gap in our country right now in MLS, USL, NASL, college soccer is after the U17 level, it dies. And that is the most prime part of your career development. And I was 18 when I went to Germany. I shined shoes for 6 months. I did all those little things and trained differently. It was it was an eye-opening experience for me that at the time, I didn't want that. I wanted to go in and play. But now when I reflect on it, that was huge. Our biggest problem is right now, Jason, what happens to those players?
Yeah, you know what? We've got the USL Pro MLS partnership, and that's reserves. I imagine that some of those kids will get a chance there. You see what LA's doing with LA Galaxy 2. That to me seems like a major step in the right direction. I don't know that any other team can pull it off right now, but it's good to at least see LA taking a chance at this.
Yeah, of course. And there's growing pains. I get all that. But that's where I think the biggest struggle right now for Jurgen Klinsmann, and when he's looking at the future of that, is what happens to the development of these players. And he's not talking about DeAndre Yedlin and Luis Gil, because those guys he brought into camp, he says they're still raw. Mm-hmm. But that's our biggest dilemma right now, is after age 17, we have no under 20 league or under 21 league. I mean, development of those players right there is what I would be if I was in charge of U.S. Soccer trying to help this development. It's not about the belief of Josie Altidore, Clint Dempsey, and Michael Bradley. Right. It's trying to figure out, what do we do after age 17? Junior year of high school, what do we do with these players? Because we need to figure that out. There's too big of a gap right now in the player development era, where we're then seeing it at the U20s. We saw it this year. Yes, it was a group of death. I get that. That's a big problem, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a it's a big country, lots of kids. How do you have one solution for all of them? Taylor, well, I have just a couple more minutes with you before I let you go. I want to ask, there's news out there that Eddie Johnson, not that Eddie Johnson, but the English Eddie Johnson, has filed a lawsuit against the Portland Timbers related to his concussions and the reasons for his retirement. And I don't know that I don't want to ask you directly about that, but every time I talk to you, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about Think Taylor and concussion awareness, and if it's in the news, definitely give you the opportunity. What's right now? What's the focus for you guys?
Well, first off, it's inevitable. We've seen it in the NFL, the NHL. We knew lawsuits would make its way into professional soccer. I chose not to pursue a lawsuit. I had one, and I've made that public over the last year that I chose not to, because I believe there's a greater good instead of me looking for a huge chunk of money. And I'm not saying Eddie Johnson's wrong, because each individual is his own case, but it's very sad. And I have spoken with Eddie Johnson before this lawsuit came out, and he is not in good shape. And my biggest concern is that Eddie Johnson starts to feel better. His family's okay. I can't speak on that lawsuit because obviously I wasn't there each and every day, but it's a problem. And you see it in the NFL talking about smoking marijuana to try to relieve concussion symptoms. It's a huge concern of our society. And it's not just a sports problem. Mm-hmm. There's bike riders, skateboarders. There's a lot of things going on right now where traumatic brain injuries is a part of it. And the only thing we can do at Think Taylor and myself is bring awareness to that, Jason. And that's what we're doing. But obviously for the Eddie Johnsons of the world and Brian Namaths, it's a tough go, and I know what they're going through. Yeah,
Brian Namath filed a suit against DC United. As far as I know, that is still kind of weaving its way through the court system. ThinkTaylor.org is the website for Taylor's organization on concussion awareness. Basically, my attitude is always err on the side of caution. I dealt with some when I was a kid. My little brother had some serious problems with concussions. Always err on the side of caution. Taylor, thank you very much for your time, man. I appreciate it.
No, Jay, there's a saying, when in doubt, sit him out, and that's key. I will say this for your listeners. There's a great article in New York Times about soccer's life or death battles. Mm-hmm. Great article for those of you that haven't read it about the argument in England of entertainment versus development, and what it really means about promotion and relegation and what it does to their players and to their board of directors.
There you go. My good acquaintance, Taylor Twellman, on the line with me. Thank you very much for your time, Taylor.
See you, brother.
Hopefully we'll bring you back around, and maybe we'll talk about that friendship. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning. Graham Ruthven joins us to talk doping in soccer. How big of a problem is it? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
On the line with me now, live from Scotland via the magic of Skype, Graham Ruthven, who has a fascinating piece at Sports on Earth on doping in international soccer. Doping is a problem and it needs to be dealt with. Graham, how are you?
I'm good, Jason. How are you?
I'm good. This is a very sobering topic, and I started the show out today, and I've done this a couple times over the course of the life of this program, and it's been about a year now, or a little short of a year. Sometimes we have to a little cognitive dissonance. We have to suspend our skepticism, suspend our disgust at some of the things that happen in sports in order to just flat out enjoy them, and that goes for soccer as well. And I think the obvious issues that we all know are out there are match fixing and corruption. Doping doesn't get many of the headlines, but it is a problem. You found that it's a problem?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the match fixing controversy. It's almost as if football can only handle one controversy at any one time. So about a year ago, it seemed like soccer was going to have this, a Lance Armstrong moment, and all of a sudden it was forgotten about, and in came the match fixing scandal. So really what got me thinking about the problem of doping in soccer again was that I was seeing that the Sochi Olympics was going to have the most comprehensive doping lab in the history of the games, or the history of the Winter Games. I'm not sure which one. It just made me think about, well, really what happened to that Lance Armstrong moment that soccer was going to have, and has there really been any solutions to the problems? Has the evidence really been taken on by any of the authoritative bodies in soccer, and none of them had. It's really still the same problem that it was a year ago.
Well, let me ask you about the mechanics of this. I mean, we know that there is the anti-doping organization out there that has been in the news with the Lance Armstrong scandal and some other things. Swimming gets involved in this on occasion, track and field certainly. But how much cooperation is there between world football, and you want to put that on FIFA or UEFA in Europe, or any organization that administrates football on this planet? How much cooperation is there between the anti-doping organizations and FIFA or down the line?
Well, going by the quotes and what we know from the WADA and the various figures at that organisation, there doesn't seem to be much cooperation between the two at all. Blatter has been quoted on a number of occasions saying that he doesn't want a witch hunt, which is really the wrong way to look at it. And also there's a quote in my article, I can't quite find it at the moment, but it's from, actually I found it here, David Cartlidge, the general director of the WADA, saying that they've been banging their heads against the wall trying to get access to the evidence that was gathered, and he's talking about the evidence that was gathered in the case of Fuentes, who was the doctor at the heart of the Operación Puerto case that really rocked cycling about a couple of years ago. So there's not really much. FIFA probably have the leverage to at least apply some sort of pressure to get this evidence. A lot of people look at this evidence as really the gatekeeper to any possible doping scandal in soccer, and really there's been no pressure at all from FIFA or UEFA or any of the bodies in football.
Yeah, let's connect those dots. I mean, you mentioned the cycling scandal and this Spanish doctor. There is some evidence that Spanish clubs specifically, and I don't want to make it just about Spain because I'm sure it's a much more pervasive problem, but the evidence that is available connects Spanish soccer, top level, Barcelona, Real Madrid, with doctors and figures in that world who have certainly been implicated in doping scandals.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, you mentioned Spain there, and it's difficult. You don't want to point the finger at Spain specifically. However, this case and a lot of the evidence has come from the Fuentes case was in Madrid, so naturally there's a lot of Spanish subject to talk about, and it has kind of been implied. It's dangerous to join up the dots, but if I'm going to do that, it's kind of implied by the WADA that they feel that they're not getting the cooperation from the Spanish courts and the Spanish government. I don't know if that equates to a cover-up. However, many people would point out that Spain would have a lot to lose if they were at the centre of a doping scandal. If they were to be found out to be the centre of the ring, it would completely discredit their dominance as a football nation over the past decade. So there is the motive there. Whether that equates to an actual cover-up is, I wouldn't like to speculate too much, but yes, a lot of it does seem to focus on Spain and not just lower league teams. We're talking accusations at Barcelona and Real Madrid and the very top of the game.
You know, this kind of brings me to the philosophical question of doping's role in a team sport like football with its specific kind of skill sets that are needed to play it at the highest level. Because look, it's clear that if Lance Armstrong is doping, he's gaining a massive advantage in a sport that values endurance and speed like cycling. In this sport, and you said that if Spain is implicated, Spanish clubs and the Spanish national team are implicated, it discredits their success, their recent success. I mean, I would argue that it doesn't necessarily, but that would be my own opinion, not the court of public opinion. Because, you know, you have to do a lot of other things besides have an edge with doping in order to be a good football team. So but at the same time, I guess the reality is, as you said, that if this got out there, Spain would suffer the brunt. What's the answer then? I mean, who needs to apply we can't expect it from FIFA. You mentioned in the article that in your piece that Sepp Blatter sits on the board of the WADA and doesn't want to witch hunt and refuses to really apply pressure in this area. Who can do this? And is there some member organization that can take the lead and say, look, we're doing it. We're setting an example. If you don't follow us, then perhaps you're essentially allowing this to happen within your competition.
Well, you say that we can't really expect FIFA to do it, and I think that's really quite a sad indictment on FIFA that we can't expect them to do it, because they really should be the ones to do it. They are the governing body of football in this world. They should be the ones looking at how the sport doping has completely ruined other sports. I mean, cycling's reputation is in tatters now because of the way that doping was systematically implemented across the sport. So it really should fall on them, and they've got the perfect opportunity with the World Cup. I've just been reading that there's not actually going to be a doping lab in Brazil for the World Cup. They're going to be flown to Switzerland. And if you're looking at the numbers, I mean, at the London Olympics, a test was taken for every other athlete. So that it works out about 6,000 doping tests. At the last World Cup, FIFA just took 256 samples across the whole tournament. Of those samples, none of them were positive. Now, of course, we'd all love to think that that's a sign that there's no doping in football at all. But if you're being a bit more cynical, you would look at how maybe the system is easy to manipulate. And really, football needs to take this head on. It's a positive test costs £65,000. I'd reckon that's about $100,000. So there are some who would say, well, what's the point in testing for these drugs if they don't make a difference, like you say? And that is a fair point, because soccer can't be, it's not like cycling. It's played with the head as much as it is with the legs. Football, I mean, and that's maybe, if you're looking at the Spanish example, maybe something that you would say, well, how can you say that Spain are getting an advantage from doping? Because the majority of the world-class players that they've produced are very technical, very skill set players who are not these endurance athletes. So it does really fall on FIFA, and it's interesting that the WADA have used the Olympics as leverage. They've threatened football with being withdrawn from the Olympics as an Olympic sport, but of course that leverage is really limited when the Olympics is not really in the same sphere as the World Cup. So would football really be that bothered if they were taking out the Olympics?
Well, they've already the agreement is already that it has to be a U23 tournament, because FIFA doesn't want to take the spotlight off of their the tournaments that they run. Graham, let me move us to an interesting part of this conversation that has happened in this country, in the United States, as it relates to PEDs and doping in baseball and football, starting a little bit. The notion that that fans don't care, or that it's, look, this is entertainment. We go out to the stadium, we watch on television to be entertained. If doping helps Spanish players recover a little bit better so they can be at the top of their game from match to match, then, hey, you know what? They're not really hurting anybody. Now, the competitive advantage element of it is obviously a problem, but if you sort of say, well, we're going to look the other way, And if you want to get away with it, you really can. Then is it incumbent on players to take every advantage possible? Where do you fall on that? And how do you think football handles that question?
Well, I can only really speak from my own personal perspective because at the end of the day, I don't really know how other fans feel. But a very fundamental essence of the sport for me is how players improve themselves. So I'm sure a number of my Twitter followers will know that one of my favourite players in world football is Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, he's a fantastic player. I'm sure he's a lot of people's favourite player in the world. However, the main reason I am a big fan of Cristiano Ronaldo is because I've seen his development from a scrawny teenager at Manchester United to the real specimen that he is at Real Madrid, and the way he's transformed himself with that through sheer hard work. If I were to find out that in this example, for instance, that Ronaldo was implicit in a doping scandal, that would completely ruin my perception of the player for me. It would completely ruin it would take everyone off the same footing. I wouldn't see football as being on the same footing. And how would you know that a certain team is using illegal drugs, and how do you know that they've got an advantage? And it would discredit the sport for me. But it is a difficult question, and because it's all down to personal perspective. I mean, that might not matter for some people, as you say, but for me, it does.
I mostly fall into your camp, and it certainly has affected my appreciation of the achievements of certain players. Barry Bonds comes to mind, for example. I loved Barry Bonds when he was a younger, scrawnier player. He reinvented himself as this behemoth and broke all of the records, and then that there is something there. I mean, he has been connected to illegal performance-enhancing drugs, and it does. It takes away that sense of wonder we get from watching incredible athletes do what they do, because you want to imagine that it's through hard work and natural ability. And of course, we're not implicating Cristiano Ronaldo in anything, but your specific example does bring up the question of why football fans and why soccer fans, and even in this country where Americans have been through the scandals in baseball, why we don't look at footballers with more of a jaundiced eye in this regard. That your example, I think, is one that people could conceivably come around and not, we're not going to convict him of anything, but you can imagine based on the type of, and there are several other players out there who are of a certain, I mean, look, the most stuff is size and strength. I mean, that's the clear one. But as you said, it may even be more sort of nefarious if it's things like recovery time, which is what we're talking about more with a Spanish example in terms of the national team. Yeah,
sure. And I think that what the WADA are up against is there's not an appetite really to put the effort in and the expense in to find out whether try and get this hold of this evidence and really uncover whether there is a doping problem in soccer. And there's just so many different questions. You mentioned recovery time as well. That's something with the Spanish example that is particularly interesting, given the number of games they play and how players seem to not pick up many injuries. I obviously fans want to see the best players on the pitch at all times, but if it's underpinned by a culture of doping, count me out of that.
Yeah, it's that difficult balance between the integrity of the game, which is about the level playing field and the competitive nature of it, and the entertainment value. And I don't even think, and football is not alone in this. I don't think that the wider perspective, the footballing world has come to grips with what that's supposed to be, what that balance is supposed to be. We look at what happens in Spain in La Liga with two teams typically dominating, and certainly in your home country in Scotland. And we just accede to those things. We let those things happen. It's just the way of the world. Rangers and Celtic are going to dominate, and there's nothing you can do about it. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to mention that the paradox is that if UEFA are fundamentally for fair play and they're introducing this financial fair play, that there's an essence of an equal footing beneath implementing that. Why are they not looking at doping, which is an expensive procedure? It's not something that the smaller teams would be able to afford. So it would only be the richer teams, the bigger teams that would perhaps be able to afford it, and that's giving them an advantage as well. So in essence, it does fall under the same category of FFP and putting everyone on an equal footing.
That is interesting, because you are certainly reinforcing the status quo and the power of the richest teams, because they're the ones that can get away with it and get around the test, whatever test there may be. While certainly the poorer teams and the players that don't make nearly as much money can't afford the test that will get, or can't afford the drugs that'll get around the test, and then they get caught. And then if you do decide to implement anything, because look, the fundamental problem here, and the reason a lot of sports fans have sort of let go of this issue and moved on and said, look, I can't invest any more emotional energy here, is because the cheaters are always ahead of the tests, Graham. And is there any fundamental way to deal with that issue? I mean, it's a matter of trust in a lot of, there needs to be some action taken. I agree with you, but it's a matter of trust. We have to trust that these teams are putting out their players clean, and they worked hard, and they trained hard, and now they're going to go play some football. That's not the case.
If you're talking about how athletes can be ahead of the test and how we can draw them back into that, in terms of how we can change the way the testing is done in soccer, both cycling and tennis have implemented, and tennis is a sport that I follow quite closely. They've implemented these things called biological passports.
Okay.
So this looks at an athlete's test results over time, rather than just on one specific instance, on one specific day after one specific game. That makes it easier for them to detect the differences between the samples. So, for instance, they may not actually find a substance, a banned substance in the sample. However, they can detect a difference and chart it over a certain amount of time, and they have the information that will tell them, well, a certain substance will have this reaction in their sample.
Right.
It also means that no test is wasted, because it helps build up a profile of a certain player. So that is maybe the most sophisticated way to get round these players being ahead of the tests, as you put it, and being able to manipulate the system. I should mention that I can't remember, to be honest, if it was FIFA or UEFA, one of the bodies, they have said that they intend to implement a similar system. However, this was about a year ago, and there's no sign of that actually being implemented across the board now. And next year's World Cup will be, as it always has been, individual testing after the games.
I imagine that they looked at the bottom line. They looked at the cost, because look, tennis, we're talking about, how many players are typically on the tour in a given year, men and women.
250.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are minuscule compared to what you're going to be dealing with in this sport. And sure. I don't imagine FIFA said, wait, we're going to take what kind of financial hit to do this? No, thank you.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting that, look, you have the age doping scandals specifically in Africa that have been a point of contention for the last couple of years. And we're talking about doing bone scans and that type of thing. We're concerned about a 24-year-old playing in a U20 tournament or U17 tournament, but we're not concerned about players, cheating and using the drugs of the time to help their bodies recover or to be bigger, stronger, and faster. It's cognitive dissonance on a lot of levels, and FIFA just doesn't seem to want to be. They doesn't want to put the effort in. It's just easier to say, it's not a problem. Let's move on.
And there's no incentive for the clubs either as well, because, as you say, they may be testing these younger players, but these are before the younger players have really become first team members of these clubs. If you were to implement a proper doping system at the top level and top clubs and top players, then these clubs could be losing their best players to bans and to suspension. So there's not really much for them to. Not much incentive, and FIFA's really not applying the force.
I think that it may be the message, part of the message of your piece. Again, sportsonearth.com. We're talking to Graham Ruthven about his piece on doping in football, and it's kind of an undercovered and underappreciated problem. It would seem to me that it's an imperative that the sport, and certainly certain competitions, and maybe you could put this at the feet of FIFA, need to get out ahead of this, because if something concrete does come out of a connection between a doctor known for helping cyclists dope and Real Madrid or Barcelona or one of these big clubs, then the whole system has a potential to kind of crumble. Because if you're a fan of, I don't know, if you're a fan of West Brom or Hull or Fulham, and every time Arsenal or Chelsea or Manchester City comes into the building, you have this sense in the back of your head, they're cheating. We don't even have because you know that it's not on a level playing field to begin with because of the money that they have that you don't. But if there's something else basic about they're cheating in a way that I morally feels different, then I don't know. I wonder if we end up with, sort of a lack, the interest drops at the bottom level. Maybe that pushes us to the European Super League. Graham, maybe that's what happens.
Well, maybe that's the grand plan all along.
Maybe it's a vast conspiracy. I think we've just broken the case.
Yeah, we've just solved it.
So, I mean, again, just to get to the nuts, to come back to the nuts and bolts of this, do you expect there to be, and based on who you talk to, or the quotes that you pulled, the information that you pulled, do you sense that there's going to be any sort of movement on WADA's part to push for more testing in football, or to uncover some of these connections that may or may not implicate football clubs in doping?
I've spoken to a couple of people at the WADA, not for this piece, but stuff I've written about a year ago, 6 months ago, and every indication that they've given is that they won't stop pushing. That's their job, is to apply this pressure, and they do it. This isn't just about soccer for them. We're obviously looking at it from the perspective of just football, but they apply it across all sports, and that's as I say, that's their role, that's their function, is to apply this kind of pressure. However, I don't see much of a push from the bodies in football, FIFA, UEFA, Premier League, FA, whoever. I don't see that changing, certainly before the World Cup. But as you say, if they were to take control of it now, my gut feeling tells me that there is, whether it's at the top level or not, somewhere in football there is a problem with doping. Mm-hmm. I think the bodies need to take control of it to basically preserve the reputation of the sport and show that they are in control, because I think that's one of the problems with cycling, is that this has been taken into the courts. All the evidence is being played through the courts, and cycling is really out of control of the or was out of control of the situation. Football can't really afford that.
No. It's interesting, and before I let you go, the not that the comments on your piece on Sports on Earth are necessarily representative of all kinds of fans across all kinds of places, but it does strike me as interesting that there was sort of this anger at you for even bringing it up. That's to me is a very interesting response on the part of a fan base that should be concerned if there is a competitive imbalance injected into the bodies of certain players and not others. Were you surprised by that?
Not really surprised, to be honest. Football is strange in that sense that there has been so many different scandals, and there seems to be a different problem for the sport to deal with seemingly every week. However, it still retains a sense of innocence among its fan base. There's still a sense, especially within English football and British football, there's still this sense that the game is still pure, and the English fans or British fans may look out to Italy with scorn and look at how they've had all these different scandals, and they may say, well, that's them, not us, but they're not willing to ask the questions of themselves, and it's really indicative of the sport as a whole, because that attitude doesn't just stop at the fans, it permeates all the way up through the system.
Yeah, it does seem on occasion that there's just too much to deal with. I mean, match fixing seems like it's somebody else's problem all the time, but we know that that they will go after, match fixers will go anywhere and they will get anybody. And just because you believe your particular league, your particular team couldn't be involved doesn't mean they're not. You'd be surprised. And then, then obviously we're constantly dealing with the issues of Brazil right now and the white elephant stadiums and the misappropriated funds and the people of Brazil being upset about spending on the World Cup and Qatar and Russia and obviously FIFA corruption in general is sort of an overarching problem that the whole organization. It just seems like, as you said, people just don't want to they just don't want to add this to the list of things that they're dealing with right now.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned there that fans aren't willing to really think that it could be their team who are implicit in it. Well, that might actually be at the core of it, because if you look at individual sports like cycling and tennis, of course, there's a fandom in those sports and people have their favourites. However, I would argue there's not the same kind of support. No. And the same fanship of individual sportsmen as there is of teams. No. So there's always this fear that, well, if we go and look at this team, then there's that could come back and hunt and find out my team as well. Mm. So it's a very complex. Very complex mindset to untangle.
The tribal nature of fans certainly plays into their ability to sort of push this to the side and say it can't be my team. And if there is cheating, it's obviously that team that beat my team that cheated, not mine. Graham Ruthven, go follow him on Twitter. It's Graham Ruthven. I was going to say it phonetically for the spelling purposes. Go read this piece, Sports on Earth. He's got a link in his Twitter page. Thanks a lot for your time, Graham. I appreciate it.
No problem, Jason, anytime.
Fascinating discussion. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to move to Spain. Probably won't talk doping in Spain. We'll talk actual soccer with our friend David Cartlidge. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Don't go near. Be right back.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Jason Davis back on Soccer Morning, joined now on the telephone by our friend David Cartlidge. I say friend again.
Hello.
Hi, David. I said I called one of our earlier guests a friend, and he said we're not friends, we're acquaintances. So David and I are acquaintances via this show. I don't want to misuse the word friend. I've seemed to have gotten in trouble already. So our acquaintance, David Cartlidge, who joins us to talk about Spain and La Liga. Follow him on Twitter at DavidJACA. All right, David. First, I just had a very interesting discussion with Graham Ruthven about doping in football in general. But he has a piece out that specifically addresses a scandal that never really erupted the way we thought it might in Spain. Is there a sense that doping is something that happens there? And what's the general feeling among fans if that is the case?
Yeah, sure. Doping in Spain, it's a very, very sensitive issue across a lot of sports. We take in cycling, football, and tennis as well, because a lot still persists around Rafael Nadal and his injuries and his downtime, shall we say. But cycling has really been where it's been exposed in Spain. And in football, there's a bit of denial there, but I think there shouldn't be, because there's too many links between a lot of the people who have worked within cycling and who have also worked with the football clubs as well. People like Valencia, Barcelona as well. There's these little links that exist. So there's been a denial, but there should maybe be a bit more of an open discussion on what's happened here. Yeah,
it's interesting. It seems to be the problem that world football does not necessarily want to face among all of the other scandals that we've got. Let's talk about Spain. We'll move on from doping, whether it's happening or not. It's still a fascinating league, especially this season. We've got a three-way tie at the top of the table. Now, part of this is because Atlético Madrid had a very, very bad week. They lose to Real Madrid, the first leg of the Copa del Rey semifinals by a 3-0 scoreline, and then they drop points to Almeria on the weekend. I mean, I know that was away. Is this a sign of cracks in Atleti's potential title bid?
It's perhaps what people have been predicting. I think people said, look, Atleti are a fantastic team, but there's going to be after at some point where they do hit this blip, because everybody hits a blip. Real Madrid had their blip very, very early on when we were getting the grips with the system of Ancelotti and the new players that he brought in. And then obviously Barcelona had with Tata Martino, and still with them, it took them down with Barcelona at the moment. They're still trying to find themselves perhaps and get a rhythm together. Maybe they are starting to properly find it now. With Atleti, it was a case of waiting for it to happen when it would. And it might be happening at a very vital time. That the defeat against Real Madrid, it wasn't just a normal defeat. It was almost an ode to the old Atleti, the old circus act, what people in Spain used to call them. It was a humiliation. They got very aggressive. They could have lost a few more players via a red card. They were reckless. They lost their focus. They weren't intensive in a positive manner that Simeone likes to put across. It was a strange performance. And then they went to Almeria as well, and again, they didn't seem to have that focus. And Almeria, they're a tricky side, Almeria. The league position they have is very deceptive, I think, and it was always really a chance they could drop points there for Atleti if they weren't focused, and indeed they did. And now they have to gather themselves. They've got a dead rubber now against Real Madrid almost. Simeone is going to field a weakened team now, that's a given. And then they're going to have to focus on the league and the Champions League that's coming up against Milan. And that's what's going to be important for them.
Let's talk about the other two big horses in this race. I mean, the obvious favorites, Real Madrid and Barcelona. And now that they've got, look, Barcelona had the lead, got caught. Now they're back into a dead heat. Real Madrid has made up that ground and are right there. We know that Ronaldo had his red card issue and was missing, but they're chugging along. They take out Villarreal 4-2 on the weekend. Any particular notes from that game? Anything that speaks to what Real Madrid is doing right or what they might be doing wrong right now?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of what Real Madrid right now is doing is very much right. I think they're in a good place. We discussed on the show last week about how they're quietly coming up. Yes, it's unbelievable, Real Madrid, this big club, glamorous club, all this money spent, they're coming up quietly, but they did. They came up quietly, and now they're there. They're very much in the thick of things. And you've got somebody like Gareth Bale who's getting criticised on a weekly basis, and that he's come out fighting the last week or so. He's grabbed his goals, he's got back, you can see how much it means to him. And he's a guy who's responding to the critics on the field superbly. He's not saying much off the field. I think these people are saying, look, beware who you speak to, because they were twisting Gareth. Your Spanish is not exactly amazing, and they'll take little pot shots at you whenever you can. And he's rebounded from that very well. And then obviously we also touched on the subject of Hesse, and they've got him come through the Cantera, the youth academy, and he's just been sensational, and he looks unstoppable at the moment. So Cristiano Ronaldo, he was allowed that night off, and he could sleep easy, knowing that Bale and Hesse are there as well to step up.
Barcelona beat Sevilla 4-1. Lionel Messi with 2. There was a brief period, and I know that injury has obviously been a part of this narrative for Messi, but there was a brief period where people were questioning Messi maybe taking a step back, maybe losing a little bit of an edge. I don't know that a 2-goal performance against Sevilla would put to bed those notions, but were the notions ridiculous to begin with? I lost David Cartlidge. All right, we'll see if we can get David back. In the meantime, we'll shift briefly here. We'll leave the La Liga stuff to David, the expert, if and when we can pull him back on the air. In the meantime, I did have a couple of other things on the docket that I wanted to touch on today, specifically MLS related. And I'm not sure that everybody saw this, but if you didn't, go to theatlantic.com. The Atlantic has a piece called Which Sports Have the Whitest, Richest, Oldest Fans? This is all taken from Nielsen data of the demographics of professional sports leagues in the United States. The NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, NASCAR, PGA, Major League Soccer, and NCAA, which I guess they're lumping in football and basketball, or maybe they're separating them out, but they've taken college sports and separated them a little bit. Basically, what this comes to from an MLS perspective is that MLS has a very young, very poor, and very Hispanic fan base. And I don't know that any of that is a surprise. I don't know that anybody, not very poor, a young, less affluent, let's say it that way. That's a better way to spin it, right? A younger, less affluent, and more Hispanic fan base than any other sport, essentially, in terms of percentages, not the size, just in terms of percentages. And none of this is surprising. Now, my issue with this a little bit was perhaps that the TV demographics are not necessarily reflective of the full fan base. I'm not questioning that MLS doesn't have a lot of Hispanic fans. I'm not questioning that they don't have a lot of younger fans or a lot of less affluent fans who are making less money than fans of the NFL or Major League Baseball or certainly golf, which is very, very old and very, very male. I'm trying to find the actual graphic. Here we go. MLS demo profile from this piece at the Atlantic, Nielsen numbers. 68% male, 32% female, the fan base. Ages, 14% from 2 to 17, 26% from 18 to 34. That's sort of where MLS is going to make its bones in the future. 34% from 35 to 54. It's still in the 18 to 34, at least for a little while longer. 27% 55 plus. It's a very small, relatively speaking, a very small percentage of 55 plus. Again, understandable considering that soccer has long had a problem making inroads in this country, and until 1996, when people over 55 were already adults with established habits, there was no professional league. Well, between 84 and 96, let's say it that way, and they watched the NASL crumble. Race ethnicity, 34% Hispanic, 65% white. To have this sport and these demographics break down as predominantly white with a very large Hispanic minority is, again, no surprise. And if you want to take this to that marketing speak and look ahead to what it might mean for the future of MLS, clearly having a strong Hispanic fan base in a country that is becoming more and more Hispanic as the years go by, and having a younger fan base, a good percentage of your fan base from 18 to 34 and over 34 or over 30% from 35 to 54 is good for the future. That means that you're going to continue to build that fan base as your league becomes bigger and higher profile. Income. This is, again, sort of another place that indicates the youth of the fan base. Not necessarily. It's not like, soccer attracts poor people. That's not what we're saying. What soccer does is appeal to younger people who haven't yet to reach a point where they're making a lot of money in their lives. 17% less than 20,000, 21% 20 to 40, 24% 40 to 75, 18% 75 to 100, and 20% 100K plus. It's actually very even across those ranges. I'll ask the question to you, and let's go ahead and open the phone lines while we have the opportunity. 347-756-6276 is the phone number. I'll take your calls. Do you think that this is representative of what the MLS fan base is? And the only reason I took issue with it, and again, I don't know that it's wrong in the general sense. I'm just wondering if it's completely accurate or if we should conflate these demographics and this television audience, which we know for MLS is very small. MLS has a very small television audience that it needs to build. If we should conflate that with the general fan base, a large portion of which heads out to the game week in and week out, or heads out to the game on a regular basis, but may not be inclined to flip on their television and watch the NBC Sports Game of the Week or the ESPN Game of the Week. So are they the same? Are they one and the same? I don't know. A couple of things on Twitter here. Eric says, even if you're right about the demo being different from us as a whole, don't marketers mainly care about TV data? Yeah, no, clearly from a selling the league standpoint, all of this information is crucial. All of this information is exactly what MLS is going to point to when they say, look, we're a sport of the future. We're a sport of now. We've got full stadiums. We've got vibrant atmospheres. We've got increasing team values. But we're also a sport of the future because our fan base is young. Our fan base is Hispanic. Our fan base has the potential to become more affluent over the course of time, which means more money gets invested into what those marketers want to sell. YSNMK90. Does MLS need black inner city kids? Where is NFL body type? Okay. It's going down a little bit of a rocky road there, YSN. I probably should have pre-read your tweet. MLS needs everybody. I mean, let's not act like MLS can discriminate. MLS needs to make inroads into sports, period. The sports culture of this country, which is not necessarily monolithic, which, doesn't necessarily, the same rules don't apply or the same interests don't apply in every part of the country. But there is an American sports culture overall. And MLS has to inject itself into that. Whether that means reaching into inner cities or pulling the reputation of soccer away from the suburbs. I don't know. That comes with time. I think MLS needs to do a better job of figuring out how to make soccer, professional soccer, a sport of prestige in the United States. It's the bottom line, right? It doesn't matter where you're from. When you're a kid and you have the dream of being a professional athlete, that's part of what pushes those sports to become as important as they are. And I mentioned this last week, I mentioned yesterday. The whole thing about dreaming about being a professional soccer player. The more kids that do that, the better off they'll be. Now you got to make kids dream about being a professional soccer player. All right. 347-756-6276. I know none of you are expecting the phone lines to be open right now. Apologize for losing David Cartlidge via the phone line there. We'll definitely talk more. We'll definitely talk more La Liga in the near future. We'll try to get David back or one of our other experts on La Liga. I also wanted to touch on the Julio Cesar situation in Toronto. The guy's going to come to Toronto FC on loan. We're all sort of blown away by this. Now, it basically comes down to the fact that the guy needs minutes if he's going to be Brazil's number one in the World Cup. And I saw a bit of a buzz on Twitter this morning because Phil Scolari, in addressing Cesar's situation, said, I don't really care, I just want him to go play. Now, this is a very basic, it's a non-compliment compliment to MLS. He's not actually saying MLS is a good league because apparently, as they are to do, reporters in a big football country ask the head coach, well, what do you make of MLS? It's terrible. North America's terrible. Nobody goes there to play real soccer. They go there to retire. Even Clint Dempsey was getting that. Clint Dempsey's in retirement mode, say British commentators during Premier League matches. Is he? Is he in retirement mode? Really? Julio Cesar not coming here, not coming to Canada, not going to TFC to be in retirement mode. Clearly, he's going there to get some time in, to get some play in, so he can be ready for the World Cup. It's going to take him right up to the World Cup, and it's a boon to the league. It's a boon for TFC. It's a good thing. I find the response about this being the nicest thing any international manager of a notable soccer nation has said about MLS to be funny. Do we need the validation at this point? MLS fans of the world, Do you need the validation from Phil Scolari? From Jurgen Klinsmann? Do we need from Roy Hodgson? We need this? This is what we need. We need these managers of these places where football and soccer is taken seriously, in the case of Scolari and Hodgson, to say, yeah, you know what? If those guys go and play at TFC, that's cool. I'll still consider them. They still have a place in my team if they are playing well, if their form is good. We need that validation. We need the players here, the players of that caliber and certainly of that profile, to help MLS get over that hump. I mentioned it yesterday. I failed to pull it up. The list of internationals who were signed to MLS, an MLS team, when they played in a World Cup outside of CONCACAF. Because I think that's obviously there's a different perception of within CONCACAF, and certainly some of those nations like Jamaica are not big powerhouses. Is tiny. It's maybe 3 guys. I don't know right now. I have to look at it. Eric on Twitter, back to Spain just for a second. Did you cover the decision from Spain regarding TV revenue? I mentioned it. I wanted to set it up and get to it with David. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance, and I am not informed enough right now to speak about that particular issue. Erica 270, you're on the air.
Yeah, let's talk about growing our demographics for the sport here in America. I think that's probably the role we should look at high school soccer to be playing, because high school soccer is not the top level competition for youngsters that are truly going on. We know that's club soccer, regional all-star teams, that kind of thing. But high school soccer is a way to take these guys who are playing, the FIFA 14 game and maybe don't quite fit in with the other sports culture, and get them onto a field, and not just making them players for 4 years of high school, but to make them fans for the sport.
Okay, I'll say this. You speak to something important in the development of the culture, but you also speak to something that is a matter of time more than action. I'm not sure that you can do. Look, there's more soccer, professional soccer, high-level soccer, MLS and beyond on television now than ever before, correct?
Correct.
Right. So when you have high school kids who love playing soccer but may not be good enough to go to ODP or get picked up by an academy somewhere or end up into the top-level clubs, when you get those kids into the sport, now they have an outlet to go and watch the game. They can either flip on MLS if they're so inclined, or if they're not, they can turn on the Premier League every Saturday morning when they roll out of bed at 10:30. Those things will only sort of reinforce themselves with time. You say let's get that working. I'm not sure what else you can do except make it more available for them to, as you said, not only play FIFA 14, but connect themselves to the professional game. Because what you're getting to is that for a very long time in this country, there was a large gap between everything that happens to your 18 in soccer and then becoming a fan. You can play and play and play and play, but if you never form that bond with watching the game and supporting the game, it's almost like they're two different worlds. Right? Yes, correct?
Yeah, there's a great gap there.
Yes, there is. I think it's slowly getting bridged. I mean, when I played soccer, most of my childhood, but there was never an outlet for me to be a fan of. I was a diehard fan of a baseball team, a diehard fan of a football team, but I didn't have a soccer team because it didn't exist at that point. Now these exist, and it's on television. I didn't have, it didn't occur to me to go watch the Bundesliga show on PBS or whatever was the only thing available in 1987. That just didn't occur to me. Now, if I was a 9-year-old again, I would have the opportunity to watch NBC Sports and ESPN and all of those things. And it's more likely that my dad, if I was 9 years old, as I am with my son, it would be a fan of the sport. Right?
I think that's also what you're getting at there is also important why, or is a reflection of why I think ESPN is a key part of this. I don't think people stumble upon NBC Sports or Fox Sports 1 quite at the level they stumble upon whatever's on ESPN.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. 100%.
Also in your not bars, but your restaurant bars, they don't put on NBC Sports. They don't put on Fox Sports 1. They put on ESPN2 at your Applebee's or whatever it is.
Well, at the sports bars they might, but at Applebee's, absolutely. They're like, I don't know where that is, and they're showing.
Yeah, no, they're just turn on ESPN and leave it.
Yeah, I appreciate the call, man. Thanks a lot.
All right, man.
All right, 716, you're on the air.
Hey, Jason and Steven. One of the things I think I mean, I know you're figuring this out, but I think a lot of the hate you get from the national team coaches and the press is that they want to keep soccer the way it is. And this MLS thing is, oh my God, it's the end of the world. A player like Michael Bradley came over here that's not too old. It's the end of the world. They want to keep their players over here. And I'm a fan of both sides. I love the MLS as it is. Are we going to see a day where a Kaka comes over at 21? Probably. I mean, we're not
right.
We're
well,
not at
okay.
the level that.
Not to take this to the most cynical place possible, but if the money ever gets there, then that stuff is going to happen. It just is. I mean, it just is. If that money, if MLS gets to the point where they can afford multiple players on a level of $10 million a year salary, then. Which is insane, by the way. I mean, most of those guys are making 5, 6 at the top end. If the MLS get to a place where they can have 10 of those guys, then they'll come. They'll be here. And it's obviously also a matter of sort of the one thing that MLS can never overcome, in my mind, because I don't see Europe, taking a step back in this manner, is sort of the prestige of the competition. I think MLS is always going to have difficulty when it comes to the prestige of the competition. Players will make the jump for their own reasons, as we saw, not just with Clint Dempsey and Michael Bradley, who are Americans and have connections here, but other players. Foreign players will make the jump. Argentinian players who want to get out of Argentina but don't really have a path to Europe will come here and make their names and become stars, and that will all help the league. I just don't ever foresee a period when the Champions League here is anywhere near the Champions League in Europe. So that's always going to be a problem. But it will improve. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's going to be a problem. I mean, then again, we've only been around for 19, 20 years. Most of Europe's been around for 100 plus years.
Which is my point.
Grow here. We got time to grow here. And
that's true.
I mean, the fact that we saw a Michael Bradley who could have gotten a bench somewhere else, come back over. Now he's not a Jermaine Jones. He's not one of the top level, but he's a darn good player.
Whoa. You said Michael Bradley is no Jermaine Jones?
I was good.
I would take issue with that. I think Michael Bradley is better player than Jermaine Jones in my personal estimation.
Well,
go ahead.
The better player on the field, yes, by all means. But there's image thought over there.
Yes.
And I'm saying image way miles ahead. Michael Bradley, if you look at some of the players out there that are playing his position, he's better than some players in other leagues, and we could sit there and argue that. The fact that he came over, I mean, Jermaine Defoe comes over, and he could have gotten a spot somewhere down the leagues. He's not a finished player. Yeah, he's on the wrong side of the age limit that they like to have over there, but, I mean, he's going to come over here and have fun. I mean, look at Robbie Keane out there. Robbie Keane is not a retiring player yet. He's a darn good player, and I only see this as going further. I mean, yeah, we're not going to get Cristiano Ronaldo until he's done, but there are those people out there that are willing to do it, and it's becoming younger and younger. Eventually, there will be some kid coming over that is 21, 22, that's not on a loan. I see this league going up further, and maybe it's just because I'm being naive and think very positive of the sport, but this is it's probably these leagues wanting everything for themselves. I mean, how many times does Chelsea take all the players and just sit them in their reserves because they don't want other people to have these top players? I mean, Demba Ba could play for half of the EPL, but they won't give him up because he might be a threat to the rest of the league.
Yeah, you got some interesting points there. I mean, look, again, clearly this is a matter of sort of a timeline and things happening naturally. And there are certainly actions that MLS can take to make themselves grow. Thanks for the call, man. I gotta run. Certainly actions MLS can take to push the growth of the league. We've already established that they're going to operate in this interesting, unique fashion. I don't necessarily buy the idea that there is some latent conservatism running through world soccer and coaches around the world just don't want to see American soccer succeed. I'm sure there's some irrational thoughts like that. among certain parts of the soccer community. But I don't buy that that's a major factor in any of this. I just think that there is a natural bias, which again, MLS has to prove itself. We could call it unfair every day of the week. And I was going to bring up the example of Michael Bradley going on loan to Villa and getting no time, which it was ridiculous at that point. It's even more ridiculous now. To say that, look, MLS has to prove it. And the problem with that is that MLS is going to have limited opportunity to prove it. How does MLS go outside of its bubble? Except for beating Mexican teams. And even that, and no offense to Mexican teams, doesn't have much cachet in Europe. It just doesn't. They have to go to the Club World Cup and beat Barcelona when Barcelona is in third gear? Beat Bayern Munich when Bayern Munich's in third gear? I don't know. I don't know what that future holds, where MLS can prove itself when it exists separate from what everybody believes is the best soccer in the world. We have, and that most of that problem relates to proving it to fans here who look down their noses at MLS and defer to everything happening in Europe. Fascinating stuff. All right. Thanks very much to our guests today, acquaintances Taylor Twellman, Graham Ruthven, and David Cartlidge, who we got cut off with. We'll go try to get David back in the near future to go back over some of that La Liga stuff. Today in Copa del Rey, Atlético Madrid will attempt to overturn a 3-goal deficit against Real Madrid. I don't think that's happening. Anybody think that's happening? Don't think that's probably happening. No. You can find the podcast at NASN.TV, certainly the iTunes version. At the iTunes page, there is a whole NASN iTunes page. It's fantastic. It's gorgeous. Beautiful. Beautiful. Got all of our shows. Soccer Morning, Best Soccer Show, all down the line. Those are the two I'm involved with, so those are the ones I mentioned. But there's a lot of excellent context. Corner of the Galaxy. My boy Josh Guessman out there in L.A. doing work. Interview with Robbie Rogers recently, which was fantastic. So go check out all of this stuff that we have available at NASN.TV, the iTunes page. We're on Stitcher and TuneIn, the live versions, the live versions of the show on Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, certainly the NASN radio app on the Android system. I have it on my phone. I should pull it up, but I really don't have time now. Please, if you want to send us some email, you can do that. Show at soccermorning.com or Jason at NASN.TV is my personal email address. Had a couple of guys reach out about scarves. I will throw up any scarf that you send me. Anything. I will appreciate any gifts you give Soccer Morning for the scarf wall. It's full, but we will institute a rotation policy. Someone will get knocked out. I will try to not offend any fan bases and just take out like the USA, the U.S. men's national team ones. Nobody can be offended by that. All right, that's going to do it for us. Again, thanks to the guest. I thought it was a very good show today. We will be back tomorrow on a Wednesday. Plenty to talk about. As there always is, Soccer Morning, the North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Thanks, guys. Thanks, producer Trevor. Bye.
The days on the boulevard I landed. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was I, the abstract, and me, the 5 foot.